Hello everyone, thank you for joining today. So today we're going to be doing cooking and the community voice, which is literally a mixture of me talking about the community voice and why it's important in the boardroom. And I'm also going to be cooking a rustic ribollita at the same time. Why, you might ask? The reason being is that actually one of the things that I want us to take away from this today is that different communities and different individuals learn and like to engage in different ways. And the route to me is through my stomach. I also cook to kind of chill myself out and calm myself down. It's actually a really therapeutic thing for me. And so this is an example of something that I do to kind of engage with myself. And if organisations engage me with food more, then I'd probably be more engaged myself. So just as a quick way of introduction and kind of my experience in this area, I'm quite new to the GGI. I started here about 6 or 7 weeks ago, but I've got a lot of experience within kind of community engagement across a variety of public sector bodies. So most recently, I was working at Ofwat, the water regulator, where I led a piece of work to engage with water companies for them to consider how better to integrate the community voice into all of the work that they were doing when they were planning for their next kind of 5-year cycle. As well as that, I've worked for a variety of NHS organisations, a real variety, so including in mental health, specialist children's, an acute hospital, and also within clinical commissioning groups as well. And within all of those, I've done both campaigning with staff and colleagues, who I think should also be considered as one of your communities, but also with individuals and communities on the ground as well. So that's kind of where my background is and where my interest is in the community voice. Alongside that today, as I mentioned, we are making a rustic ribollita. I can't say it, ribollita. And so just to remind you of the ingredients for anyone that is cooking today, you're going to need sliced bread, some stock cubes, and obviously some hot water to go with that, olive oil, an onion, a carrot, celery stick, 3 cloves of garlic, some kale, cannellini beans, dried rosemary, dried chilli flakes, a pinch of salt, and a medium or large saucepan and a wooden spoon to stir it all. You also need a chopping board and a knife, but I have prepped all of that in advance here. So I've cheated slightly. And so what I'm going to do today is, as you're going through things like chopping, I will continue talking and you have the opportunity to chop at the same time. So we'll start off on the recipe now. Nice and easy. The first bit that you need to do is tear your bread into pieces, and then we'll also put the bread into a hot stock, which I've also prepared earlier. So I'm throwing all of that in there now. I've seen that someone has asked for the recipe in writing. I will make sure that I send this through immediately as this is done as well. I'll focus on this for now, but I'll also send it through. But it is quite simple. So once your bread is in your stock, then, oh, now I've got a cat attacking me, please get down. That doesn't normally happen, apologies. Once your bread is in your stock, then put all of your, chop all of your vegetable ingredients. So that is your celery, your carrots, and your onions. So while you're doing that, I'm going to talk about the host of reasons why engaging with citizens should matter to boards. So the list is much longer than this, but these are kind of a few of the key points that I'd like to get across today. So engaging with citizens means that you are meeting the needs of everyone in your community in an inclusive way. Really important. You're encouraging local support, participation, volunteering, engagement. You're building on people's lived experiences to make services more effective and tailor to the organisation's response to local need. You're strengthening social cohesion and in what has been an increasingly fragmented and individualised society. And you're also enhancing local accountability and legitimacy. Now, the thing that I would add to this is all of that is very based on local communities and people that you engage with locally. When we're talking about communities today, it's really important that we think about them in a broader spectrum. So as well as communities being locality based, there are also communities of people based by religion or race or gender or other forms of identity. And it's important that when thinking about citizen voice and community voice, we're thinking about the complete spectrum in this way. Just to give an example of why it's so important to engage with the community voice, there's a really interesting King's Fund paper that I'd encourage you all to read, which was originally published in 2012 and was republished in 2015, which shows that there is a genuine link in NHS organisations between the outcomes for patients and good engagement with the staff community and the community of patients. And that actually where you see better staff engagement and better community engagement, the outcomes for patients are likely to, well, not are likely to, but do increase. People are more likely to get better because of that. So I think that over the last few months particularly, but certainly the last few years, there has been an increasing awareness in government circles in the importance of diversity of experience as well as background. That includes having board members with real lived experience of an organisation's services. It's seen as having profound value, and that means finding and developing board members who themselves have been patients and of university governors who are also students, for example. So it works in any organisation. And so just as the exec directors are accountable to their boards and the delivery, organisations are accountable to stakeholders, and those stakeholders include communities. So accountability to the individual and local stakeholders is absolutely critical to organisational success, as we just talked about with the King's paper. I'm going to pause again there in the hope that you have done some chopping. I have to say another reason that I didn't do the chopping on this call is because I massively cry when I'm chopping onions, and it would have been horrendous, the screen would have been blurry, and so I wanted to kind of get that out of the way. So the next bit that we're doing now is we're going to put the pan on a medium, oh no, that's the wrong one, on a medium-low heat. I'm just going to put some olive oil in there as well. And I'm just going to throw in my pre-prepared chopped vegetables. So those were the onions, the celery, and the carrots. I should say as well, by the way, that before I started today, I thought I'd made this recipe before, and I then realised I actually never have. So let's hope it's delicious. It's an experiment. I've made a different version of this, but not this exact one. So I hope it all goes well. But when you've sent the ingredients out in advance, it's too late to change things. So that is just going to cook there for 2 to 3 minutes until the carrot begins to soften. Obviously, normally pay attention to it. I am paying attention. It's just in the background cooking away for a second there. So to continue with what we're talking about, the community, we've spoken to a lot of non-exec directors with experience of working with a range of public sector organisations. And it is evident where organisations have a strong recognition and accountability to people and place, they are most successful in achieving their strategic goals. Boards that are able to focus on people are generally much more engaged in their role, as well as being focused on the structural accountability. So it's not just about the outcomes, it's actually about the focus of the people that are looking after the communities and are delivering for the communities. As we all know, COVID has seen a really impressive response to the public sector in adapting and continuing to provide essential services. But I think that that has also brought some real risk. In the haste to innovate, in the haste to do new things, actually communities are being left behind because they're less likely to have been engaged because we needed to drive things forward. And now, at a time where there's a little bit more space, it's probably just worth making sure that we are thinking about those communities again and engaging them when we're taking services forward and changing them for the better. So especially relevant in this, and this is another thing that I really want to take away from today, are hard to reach groups. So they're often minority groups who find it much harder to access services, and those include all of the protected characteristics, so people with disabilities, BAME groups, the elderly, those on lower incomes, and they should, because they're harder to reach, they should be thought about even more, and their voice should be brought back into the boardroom even more. And just to link this to COVID and where we've been on this recently, Public Health England research has shown that the number of cases and the diagnosis rate of COVID has been much higher amongst those in deprived communities. So, what we should do now is boards should start by researching and understanding who it is that they want to consider. So look at the makeup of your communities, those that you serve. And as I said, those communities aren't just your locality, but communities of individuals. I live in London. I've worked in a variety of NHS organisations in London. And actually, one of the things that has always struck me is that by going from one borough to another, the makeup of community can completely change. A really good example of that is Tower Hamlets, where I used to work. Tower Hamlets has actually got the highest population of Bangladeshi people outside of Bangladesh in the world. If you then go over to Hackney, there are very few people from the Bangladeshi community there. So you move into a very different kind of set of demographics. So it's amazing how kind of close boroughs are, but you might need to consider them completely differently. Also remember that hard to reach groups aren't all the same. So consider each of them and develop different and appropriate strategies to engage and bring their voices back in. And to be successful, you should react differently to the different circumstances and characteristics of groups. The other thing not to forget is that information about communities should already exist. So identify where you can get good quality and reliable information, and that will help you devise your strategy. What I have found in a lot of my work is that there are community leaders who are often the conduit to get into groups, particularly if the groups have got language barriers or other barriers such as that. So now back to the recipe. This has now been frying for a couple of minutes and it's starting to soften down. So what we're going to move into now is we're going to move into putting in the pre-prepared kale as well. In the recipe, it actually says to use Cavolo Nero, but I couldn't get hold of that. So just a normal kale is absolutely fine. And you're just discarding any stems if there were any, and you're including that in there and just frying that for another minute. While we're doing that, I'm just going to talk to you about a couple of the ingredients to gauge with community. So a bit of a summary of the stuff that we've talked through already. So the first thing to say is to build trust. So show that you're listening to groups by inviting them to be involved in things like surveys and focus groups. Not only going out and listening, but showing that you're listening. So responding to what those focus groups and surveys might say, and showing that you're doing that. There will of course be occasion as well where actually you can't react to a community in exactly the way that they want you to. If that is the case, you should still speak about it and be really open and honest about why that is the case. The next, and we've talked about this quite a lot, is about striving for representation. So this is really about building diversity and having kind of new mindsets on your boards. So this isn't just about the engagement part. This isn't just about taking the information back in and going back out with engagement, but also at the point that decisions are made. So making sure that there's representation on the board as well. I'm going to pause before I go into the next set of ingredients for that, because now we're going to be tipping in a couple of things to the pan. So the first thing is I'm tipping in some chopped tomatoes, again, that I opened earlier, and some cannellini beans, which I've already drained so that I didn't have to disappear to the sink. And again, just pour these in there. Do make sure that they're drained. And give that a quick stir around. Apologies whilst I focus on this for just a second. Okay. So that's now in there. I'm just going to quickly check the recipe to make sure. Yeah, I do also now need to add the stock as well. So if you remember earlier on, I put the bread into the stock. So that's now been soaking up all of the niceness from in there. So now we're pouring this in here. So that's the stock and the bread. So it's becoming much more of a kind of soup texture now. I should have said that this will end up being a bit like a mix between a soup and a stew, really. So it's sort of a thick soup, I suppose. And the other thing to put in now as well is your dried rosemary and also your crushed chilli flakes. I probably put a bit too much of those in there, so this will now be absolutely boiling hot. Right, okay. Now we can leave that to cook again. That's just going to be cooking there now for about 10 minutes. And actually it does need to be on a high heat. So just make sure that that's on a high heat. Just to give you an idea of how easy this recipe is, that will be cooking there for 10 minutes now. And when that's done, the recipe is done. You just add a bit of salt at the end. So in 10 minutes, we'll go back to that and it'll be ready to eat. So to finish off, there are another few ingredients about engaging with communities. So engaging with the respective community leaders. So I just mentioned this one. Sorry, I thought the cat was coming up again then, just making sure that he's not going on the bench again. Apologies for that. So working with those who are most able to influence and engage. Learn about the groups. So take the time to understand the key dynamics of the groups and shift your approach according to this insight. And as I said earlier, this is really important you do this group by group and that it's individually managed, not managed by the whole. Find a form of engagement that works for the community. So this comes back to me doing this cooking today. As I said, the route to me is through my stomach, and actually I find cooking very therapeutic. If you want me to be interested in something, this is how you're going to get me. I might be unusual, but there are communities that might want to engage in this way, but consider things like big group exercises, going down to individuals, also kind of going through different channels, so using visual and audio and online, and where possible, particularly recognising the current circumstances, some face-to-face engagement. But most importantly, make it easy and interesting to engage, because if it's not easy and interesting, people won't do it, people won't come along. Again, particularly in this time, I think this is a really important thing for us to recognise. Digital engagement is really important, and many organisations have come on leaps and bounds, and as have individuals, but you must make sure that you go beyond digital engagement. So really consider the digital divide and what it means for your communities. Previously, you'd actually be surprised at how many people are still not digitally engaged in this age. Previously, when I worked in water, we actually worked a lot with people who would, oh, sorry, the cat is up again, isn't it? Please get down. I apologise for that. I saw a comment about Food Standards Agency, and I assumed that it would be him. Luckily, it's only myself and my partner doing this, eating this food, and I might not tell him that the cat has been there. So go beyond digital engagement. When I worked in water, actually one of the things that was incredible about working in that was how many people in this country don't even have access to mains water, and how many people still work off wells and don't have electricity and therefore don't have digital influence. So we did quite a lot of work there to get water companies to engage with those people and discuss how they might change their lives. So really think about how broad communities can be, particularly if you work in an area that's kind of not so much London, but a bit more off-grid. And finally, make it beneficial for the communities you engage with. So always engage on the benefits of engaging. We've talked about that already. And actually, if you need to give a bit to get a bit back, it's really important. Like I have shared this recipe with you today, and my cat. That was everything that I had to say about engaging with the community and in the community voice. But I would love to hear if there are any questions aside from how badly behaved my cat is normally. I can verify really badly all the time. But thank you for coming. And yeah, if you've got any questions, I'm very happy to answer those. Stunned into silence. I'm not surprised.
I really like the idea, and I'm really sorry I didn't have any of the ingredients. I didn't have bread, so I couldn't make it live. But I want to go back to the recipe because it actually looks really nice.
No, that's absolutely fine. So what I'll do is everyone who's here, I'll share it with you after. I have to say, it has been stolen from a cookbook. It's not a McCulloch original.
Do you know what? I need something like that because one of my commitments was to go a bit more veggie and vegan in 2020. But then I decided to lose weight, so I needed chicken to have protein.
Well, I'm telling you now, this is actually a brilliant book for kind of weeknight cooking, because it really does take 15 minutes.
Yes, yes.
Also, my partner would be laughing at this point because he says, any excuse for me to tell people that I'm vegan, I will take. So
Good and vegan does.
I'll be bullied for that.
Vegan prerogative. I was just wondering if there were any sort of business cases that could be made for better engagement with the community, because these kind of communications costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time, and it's a resource that's not been invested in very much.
Yeah.
But I just instinctively know that plans being made that need to be changed later because the community wasn't involved in the making of those plans cost more in the long term. And so I wondered if there was any sort of research that was being done.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier about the King's Fund paper, which came out in 2012 and was republished in 2015, which shows in the NHS the correlation between good outcomes for patients being directly linked to good staff and other community engagement. So there is research about it. I also think almost exclusively, if not exclusively, if you look at the way in which anchor organisations, so organisations that are kind of central to local communities, engage with communities, and compare those directly to their regulator and how the regulator has perceived their plans or has perceived the delivery of what they're doing, those two things are linked. So we see it in the CQC all the time. We see organisations falling down in their ratings and indeed their outcomes if they haven't engaged with the community about how those services should be delivered. I also saw it an awful lot in water, so where an organisation hadn't engaged, and it's not just about engagement, and I should say this again, it's about taking that engagement and listening to that engagement and applying it. And where organisations had done that and had shown that they'd not only listened, but they'd applied and had changed it, the plans tended to be better, and there were better outcomes for customers. So there is some research out there about it, and because I recognise that it's expensive, but also the correlation to, you know, having to sort out an organisation after a bad CQC report and what that could cost. There's also real correlation there as well.
And of course, there'll be less funding when the rating has been degraded.
Indeed, indeed.
Stephen, can I ask, is there a, what about measurement? How do you measure engagement? Apart from the kind of outcomes related stuff that you mentioned in the King's Fund research and so on, which I think would be a very useful thing to have a link to at some point.
Yeah.
How do you measure the are there other ways to measure the effectiveness of your engagement?
Yeah, so I have to say, measurement of this kind of engagement can be really difficult. And I actually went to an event a few months ago which promised to give me the solution, and the solution was exactly the same as what I was already doing and didn't feel was quite good enough. I think that there are advantages in the kind of modern digital age about engagement via digital channels. So there's loads of data that you can pull down from that. And in fact, there's more work now being done, not just about kind of outreach, but also about sentiment and what that means, and about key influencers and kind of, you can do this wonderful mapping where you see who an influence was that's put out a message and where that message is spread. So actually you then get some more qualitative feedback that you're able to use to allow to show you who you should be engaging with in communities. As far as the face-to-face stuff though, and the kind of engagement, it needs to be, you should measure on output. So you should measure on how many people you've managed to reach and how much influence they have. But the outcome is much more difficult to measure. And generally it needs to be related to a business measure rather than a comms measure. So my suggestion would always be to link it to something like outcomes for patients in a service, or outcomes of incidents of water leakage in an area, or kind of a variety of different things like that. I'm just trying to think if there's, what I'll try and do as well with everyone that's on this call is I'll see if there is a, I think there's a couple of websites I can share that have got some really interesting information that kind of share the direction of measurement. But to be honest, it is hard, but it's also really important.
Yeah.
So we have an example of successful engagement that was measured, that GGI did in Barking.
Fab.
But that was a staff engagement project.
Right.
And what was interesting, so the measurement was very clear. So it was about educating, it was about engaging staff members in patient safety, and to really make that saying that patient safety is everybody's job something real.
Yeah.
That people really got involved with. And the measurement of that was that the frequency of reporting of incidents went right up, but the seriousness of those incidents went right down.
Yeah.
So we had a measurement, a metric of improving patient safety there. But what I really learned about that process was a lot of education was needed in the engagement. So there was actually, we were imparting knowledge on to staff about patient safety at the same time as listening to what their recommendations were and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that sounds really interesting, and I think that comes back to the outcomes thing, doesn't it? And actually having something that you're able to measure that already exists, and then show the improvement and the scale of that improvement is a really brilliant way to do that. I also think that actually there's a live example, which even without kind of us going into the depth of measurement, there's a lot of conversation at the moment about the clarity of messaging around COVID being linked to the kind of increases or decreases of cases of COVID in the UK. And while, as I said, no one has done the kind of big deep dive into that yet, I think actually there's some measurement that we can all see on the surface about kind of clarity of measurement, and you can compare it to, like, countries can each compare themselves to each other to see what worked and what didn't. So I'd be really interested to see how that kind of comes about afterwards, because effectively COVID is two things. It's obviously a horrific illness that is doing terrible things to the world, but the response to it is all communications. It's all about good communications and engagement. And so it's a real opportunity for us after this is kind of quietened down, for us to look at it in a different way and kind of experience that differently. So
it's a two-way street.
Indeed. And actually, yeah, that's a really good point, that the people, some of the hardest to reach people are the people who don't want to be engaged with and don't want to listen. And how do you get into those people's heads? And again, it comes back to that point that I made earlier, which is about listening to how people want to be engaged with, because everyone will want to be engaged in some way, even if they don't show it straight away. And if you get resistance, that's fine. You just need to find the kind of best route and best way in.
Yeah, I think some maybe because they don't want to engage with the NHS Trust, maybe they would want to engage with somebody, and it's kind of like trying to find who they want to be engaged with, and then engaging with those people.
Yeah,
be a better way of resourcing.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, this is, so the way in which the NHS is expecting communities to engage with them is really interesting at the moment as well. So I read an article either today or yesterday where they are now asking people to contact 111 before visiting A&E to try and stop the flow of people going through. And that's good because that message is getting out there, but it's an interesting new way of managing the healthcare system.
think I was talking to Jeremy yesterday, who's the chair at Black Country Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust. At the back end of, you probably know the international research we are trying to help doing on integration.
Yeah.
And he mentioned really two very important points. But what COVID has done, what you were saying, Stephen, earlier, is that it enabled people to have access to things without permission and ability to engage with them by natural. So what he was saying is, we as a trust have opened up to different people and said, well, if you need to set up for acutes, for example, what they've said to acute is that if you want to set up a dirty site where you want to treat COVID patients, you can have one of our sites. Before that, it never was possible. So
Yeah.
the engagement at that level is interesting to watch. Equally, what he was saying is, due to COVID, the whole BLM and Black minority ethnic stuff has gone really exponential, and they've allowed that to happen and encouraged staff to do. And what now staff have done is they've gone completely on a tangent and set up various different Facebook groups to say, there's a group about recruitment, there's a group about harassment, there's a group about, all of that is just kicked in kind of a rebellion force, which they want to use to their favor. So I think the engagement have got different flavors to it. Depends how much you allow, how much you don't allow. And they've taken the approach, they want to do it seriously, and they want to open up to the full engagement package, regardless of whatever that might be. So if people are against it, let's engage. So, I think that's a really useful message and powerful message, that negative engagement is also an engagement that opens up different things. So really, really interesting to hear him.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a really good point. And actually, the fact that engagement needs to be absolutely everywhere. So it's not just about kind of, showing face and engaging with people and communities on the street, but actually, if you use colleagues as a community, communities within there should be influencing HR and people strategies and documents. I've learnt an awful lot recently about terminology that should be used on policies about people having children, to represent a variety of different people. So not just cis women who give birth, but also gay couples, transsexual people, and actually what having a child might mean to them. It's not about your body, it's about having a child. So that there's, and without that kind of engagement, this is a really micro example, although for a macro issue, of why engaging with a variety of communities is so important. Oh, for goodness sake, get down. Sorry. I've actually got some advice about this ribollita as well. I used gluten-free bread in it. I would suggest you don't do that because it's fallen apart. Do you know what? I'm a really good cook, and I think this is one of the worst things I've ever made. But because I've messed it up, not because of the recipe. It says specifically use a nice crusty bread, and I use gluten-free bread, and that's been my downfall. It's a bread soup.
I just enjoy saying the word ribollita. I
Yes.
wonder if I said it 3 times, would the magic spell happen?
Yeah. I actually think I was calling it a ribollita earlier as well. So, but all the names in this house
all falling apart.
Stephen, I took part in a community event one time that was Hastings has got a very large, comparatively speaking, refugee community. I think because of where we are, and it's a cheap place to put people, but also because our local council was very welcoming and actually decided to take double the quota that had been suggested. And we ran an event. We got the refugee community to bring along food, and we put it in the town center and invited people to come and try. And it was great because we were able to engage with people who were curious, but probably were cautious or wary of the refugees coming. And it was amazing the number of people that we at least got them to we were able to challenge some of their ideas or something, because they would stop and have a little bit of food, or even if they were just stopped because they were curious. And it really transformed things here in terms of the relationships that we were able to have with refugees, to really help them to feel like they were part of the community and not just stuck in a corner somewhere. But more importantly, almost, the people who were minded to think, because we're also quite a poor town, so there's a lot of people who think, well, what are they taking from us? And we were able to get rid of a lot of those myths in the course of a lunchtime. It really does work. Food and challenging ideas is a great way to go.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, frankly, we are all human, aren't we? And we've got some very basic needs, and food is one of those. So I completely agree with you. It's brilliant. And actually, I think one of the challenges that there is at the moment is that because people are, and rightly so, staying at home more, and there's less kind of engagement on the high street, how do we get beyond that, and how do we get people to engage digitally? So that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this cook along today, was the idea that people have something nice to eat afterwards, and so there's something there. Although understandably, I obviously wasn't able to send the ingredients to all of your houses. It would have been a mess. But yeah, I mean, that sounds fascinating. Was it run by did you say it was the council that
Well, the council part funds it, or has done in the past before they were bankrupt. And we had our community engagement, because we're quite a diverse community, again, because I think it's geography. But we run a number of events throughout the year with different hard to reach groups, and they are always based around food. We have a picnic in the park, and people are invited to bring things and share things. And we do a Chinese New Year event, and we do a couple different events with the Muslim community. And so it was a funded thing that we did, and had a community engagement officer and all sorts of things, but sadly all gone now.
That is a shame, because
Yeah.
as I'm saying, it's the best way to build relationships and to make sure that there's...
Absolutely. And it didn't cost a lot, because we found that often people were willing to provide a pot of this or that because they wanted to be part of it, and they wanted to share what they brought with them with other people in the community, because they were very eager to be part of the community. And sometimes we have a budget for it, but sometimes we didn't.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. I mean, it does remind me, my friend Razia, she just wanted to make sure that the children that were on the streets, the homeless in Cape Town, had something to eat. But I remember I had her cooking a curry every evening and handing out to street children, had so many different other effects that she could never foresee, in that she got to know the stories that they had, their challenges, and was able to put them in contact with who could help. They met each other, and so they could, you know, work together to you know, with various things and look out for each other. And then because they almost formed a type of a community, a Netflix documentary maker then made a documentary about the plight of street children, and got funding to help put them into care and get them off the streets. So the roll-on effects just from cooking a meal was amazing.
And actually, that's made me think of something that because thank you, because that's made me think of something that I don't think maybe I didn't mention during this, which is there's something as well. So boards and individuals absolutely should have community engagement, and what that means at front and centre, and knowing who their communities are. But there's also something wonderful about community engagement just for the sake of the engagement. So not being about a specific group, but actually bringing individuals together. And actually that's something that I've seen as Barbara sort of mentioned, quite a few local authorities doing really well, encouraging free events locally, to bring people together from all sorts of backgrounds who live kind of very near each other, but their paths may not cross very often. It's a really good way of bringing people together as well. Fab. Are there any more questions, or is it me eating the rustic ribollita, otherwise known in my version as bread soup, but I'm sure all of your versions will be lovely.
The rustic ribollita renaissance 2.0.
Yes, I hadn't even thought about the R's in this. Yes, I mean, actually I had, and that's why I did this. Fab. Well, thank you all very much for joining. Really appreciate the time. I will send the recipe on to all of you, photographs from this book, so don't tell the copywriters. I hope you all enjoy it and have a good afternoon.